Welcome to the Entrepreneur Strategies podcast, where we talk about how to scale your wealth, health, and family well-being. And this is a podcast that focuses on providing valuable insights, inspirations, and strategies to entrepreneurs and individuals passionate about business growth and success. Today, we have the honor of having Gary Laney with us, who has an incredible background. I've read a little bit about you. I understand that you're a triple major from Northwestern. You're a speaker and an author, and you have a book out called The Power of Strategic Influence. And I'm just so excited to have you because you have clearly a wealth of knowledge. You have a very diverse background working with 20 plus companies. And so very excited to have you here. So thank you for being on the show.
Hey, Mike, so nice to meet you. We've been talking for a little bit of time, so thanks for having me. It's really an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, very excited to learn. This is going to be a great episode. So, Gary,
Super.
I would love to learn a little bit about your background because you've done so much. I would just love to learn what led up to that. Where exactly are you from, and what got you into the career path that you've chosen?
Okay, so I'll give you the nutshell version because there's a lot of stuff going on in my life. But I grew up in Lehigh, Utah, and kind of the formation of my future direction was I grew up in a family business. My dad was an entrepreneur. His dad was his dad. So I mean, we have three generations of entrepreneurs in my family. I knew someday that would be me. I grew up learning from my father from a young age. A lot of kids, they'd get through a school and they'd go home and do homework or play. I would go to my dad's store or one of his stores. And I had tasks from the very beginning, stocking shelves, cleaning. He made me start at the bottom as a kid, and I appreciated that. And then, later on, I was helping him do deliveries. I was doing. We own a mercantile, so it was called Laney's Mercantile, which meant take a J.C. Penney's from that era and break it down into maybe a 3,000 or 4,000 square foot store that had appliances, small appliances, clothing, men, women, children, etc. Great environment to go up in because it was something that was exciting. I got to meet customers. My dad put me into sales, into marketing, then into advertising. I ultimately ended up running one of his stores, and then to help him retire when he had sold everything, he had his last one. I decided to buy it from him when I was in my 20s. So my first, if you will, opportunity to get into entrepreneurship with his tutelage. So that was the kind of foundation, which was an amazing foundation. When I went to get, so I got a BS in marketing from undergrad, but when I went to get my MBA, I decided I wanted to be in a top like 10 school. And there's, every year that changes a little bit. For the most part, the makeup is the same. Harvard, Stanford, MIT. But then you have the Northwestern, which was in the top 10, became number one for 20 years after that. There's Carnegie Mellon, there was Wharton, Columbia. I got accepted all those. Kellogg seemed to be the best match for me. It was more pragmatic, more of a marketing approach, more marketing background, even though they had all kinds of disciplines. So it was a great experience. I became the co-chairman of the consulting club. I wanted to get into something that was kind of management related, and that gave me that mentality and kind of preparation for that. I then took a job, an internship, and then got into consulting full time. Did that for a little while until I was then attracted back into management, which is what I was doing before, which kind of helped me get into these good schools. So I had an opportunity to be the VP of sales for a commercial publishing company, did that for 10 years. Decided to leave that and take my minor from my MBA, which was Management of Information Systems. Today it'd be called IT probably. And so pursued that, got into high-tech sales, ran national and worldwide organizations for several companies. Most of them are probably owned by Oracle today. So great experience doing that. Helped take a company public called Eloquent, which got acquired by OpenText. And at the end of that 18, 19-year period I was doing that, my children were at the age where I really wanted to be home or wanted to go to activities during the week. VPs of sales do not have a life. If people tell you otherwise, it's not true.
Yep.
Because at the beck and call of somebody who has a big deal, you're on a plane and you're going. And so, I managed a couple of thousand salespeople during that period of time, had a great experience doing it. But it was time for me to get into the entrepreneurial kind of side of my life. I got into a partnership. That didn't go so well. I decided to go solo And then for the next, it's been almost 20 years. I've been involved in 20 different startups. I had a great experience with taking businesses that need to be turned around and turning them into successful ventures and then selling them off. I've done that 12 times. The other 8 times I was working for someone else, including that company that I helped take public. One of the companies I was working for, I was there kind of as a transitional VP of sales because it was an assignment. It was like they hired me as a contractor. And their objective was to get acquired by Salesforce and Mark Benioff, who at the time had been my competitor because I was working at a company called Upshot. Mark Benioff, who's multi-billionaire now, had deeper pockets than we had, even though we thought our technology was better. I proved it, and through our sales methodology, I should say, by proving that we would, out of 3 deals that we got into with Salesforce, we won 2 every time. And wow. Mark was impressed with that. After I left there to get into my entrepreneurial venture, he brought me into his office, and the first question he asked me is, "What do you want to know?" Because I'd been his competitor, before that. I said, "I want to know that you really did make the numbers that you bragged about." And so he said, "Okay, sit down." So he pulled out his financials. I don't know if Mark would people know he did that. Now I'm on a podcast, he'll probably find out. But he was very liberal with his ability to show me and prove to me that he was legit, and his company was. And he had deep pockets. We had great background from Oracle and great backing. And so I went on. I did some more work with him, in a capacity of one of the companies I was working in. But that was a great experience for me. Led me to my own entrepreneurial stuff, mostly, and I did a lot of e-commerce. I did. My wife was interested in doing fashion blogging, so we got involved with one of the very first popular fashion blogs on the internet called She Me. Kind of like a PG version or G version, if you want to, of Sex and the City on TV, kind of that same kind of thing. She had writers that worked for her, and they would put links in the content of this dialogue between these girls, like on Sex and the City. And then those links would lead to products, and people would buy products, and we sold like tens of millions of dollars of affiliate product, and we got a portion of that. So that was interesting to do that. I remember going to a convention in New York, and I was the VP of sales for my wife for this business. We had 7 businesses, but this was hers. And so everybody there thought I was gay because I was part of this. Nothing wrong with that, but it's just I wasn't, because I was the head of marketing and sales for this the She Me business. They expected I would be that. I wasn't. I was just a good guy that knew how to market and get people together and make it happen. So that was a fun experience. And then I've continued down that road. I've bought and sold 12 businesses that were kind of in a turnaround situation, built them to a point, and then exited. And the last time I did that was really during COVID. Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, what I find so fascinating about your story so far is that, you came from this lineage of entrepreneurs, and you did jump into the family's business in the very beginning. And oftentimes that's sort of the end of the story, right? And so maybe the next generation down just continue to maybe grow that business, or maybe they launched in affiliate companies. But what's interesting in your story is you started off there, but then you actually did go and cut your teeth in the corporate world. But what's fascinating is the corporate world that you were in, it was still as if you were an entrepreneur, because you are, even though you're working for a larger corporation, you're the one who's growing the company to a point where you can then sell it off, or to pass it into, or to have the company be sold to a larger company. And so it almost is, even though you went into the corporate world, like you were an entrepreneur over and over and over.
Yeah, I really think you're right. I mean, listen, if I was in accounting, or if I was, in some role, that development or something, I may not have felt like it was entrepreneurial. But in sales, in business development, and I had 400 people reporting to me, or 100 people, or 30 people, whatever the startup size was, you absolutely had an objective, and that was to go public or get an exit. And it was very entrepreneurial. And startups, you have to wear many hats. If I was a VP of sales and I had 12 reps, I was very involved in every capacity, from the the very beginning, the sales lead generation process, right to the post close where we're trying to generate leads from existing clients. So yeah, it's really, really true. And but I love that kind of thing. Here's the weird thing. I was going to Northwestern. I decided, I'd been doing sales before that. It helped me get into the B schools. But I always felt like I can do more than sales. I felt like that didn't limit me. That didn't define me. But what the weird part about it was I got into consulting and other things, which didn't make as much money. That wasn't the determining factor, but I just didn't enjoy it as much. I love the acquisition of clients. I was the guy that you bring in to acquire new clients, not to farm the old clients. I don't enjoy farming. I was a big elephant hunter. I really loved doing that stuff. And sticking me out somewhere where they have no clients and give me a challenge, and I'll love every second of it. And then it gets to a point where it's grown, and then I get bored. But go ahead.
Yeah, tell me about that, because that's a challenge for a lot of small business owners, is growing the business, getting those first initial clients, or developing that process for the acquisition. So what in particular, what do you think made you so successful in being able to, not just once, but many times over with different types of companies, acquire clients at such a fast rate?
I'm going to introduce my book for one reason right now, because it tells the answer to that story. So have you had a chance to look at this yet? I don't know if you have, but
I've gone through the summary. I have yet to actually read it, but I am excited to read it.
Well, the first chapter, I'm not a fiction writer, but I wanted there to be a storyline from the beginning. The storyline goes as follows: you're on a ship, expecting to go somewhere that you had signed up for and boarded to go on. And during the process of the voyage, something happens, a storm, whatever, you get redirected to an island that you're not familiar with. You've lost contact with the outside world, your previous world. You come into this place with your knowledge, your ability to, engage with people. You might have a tiny little bit of money because you weren't expecting to be on this for more than a few days, and maybe a few changes of clothes, and that's it. So what do? You're dropped, and people always say this: what would you do? Could you be dropped in a city, any city in the world, and could you survive? So that was the story, but in a different way, because I love the sea, I love the ocean. And so what prepared me for that, I really believe, was, number one, growing up in this family with a military father who was very strict, good guy, a really good guy, but he was very strict about being organized. He wanted me to learn every aspect of the business. I did the accounting and bookkeeping. I did the advertising, I did the marketing. I learned everything about that business. And so when I got into the MBA program, it was kind of a breeze for me, because I understood the practical and the real life aspects of what those business scenarios and those case studies were that we were talking about. Most people had not ever had real life experience, maybe not related to business, but maybe something else. But so number one, my dad. Number two, my church gave me the opportunity to go on a mission, service mission. I'm from Utah, so you can guess I'm Mormon or LDS. And my brother had done it, and he had a great experience. You leave for 2 years, you give up dating. This is not an easy thing to do. I dated a lot before my mission. I had a lot of girlfriends, and so all of a sudden you're in a new place you've never been to before. Kind of this scenario from my book. And how do you start from scratch? No influence, no reputation, very little means. And how do you make a successful experience and venture out of that? Well, this mission took me from scratch. Number one, I didn't speak Spanish. And everybody says, how do you not speak Spanish? When you grow up in America, everybody learns Spanish. I said, well, my high school gave me an option to do vocational classes or language. My dad was an electronics engineer, if you will. And so I decided that I would take electronics for 2 years. I did really well in it because I grew up in this stuff. And so all of a sudden I was assigned to go to this place in Spain for 2 years. Didn't know any Spanish, especially Spain Spanish. I'm doing a project right now with a bunch of guys from Mexico and other, Venezuela and other places. And we've been talking, and words come up that they don't recognize that I speak, and vice versa. And the reason is because Spain, they speak the old world Spanish. Vosotros, they also use the lisp, but people call it, it's really la theta. So instead of saying gracias, it's gracias. In Barcelona, it's Barcelona. And we were talking about basketball, and they call it basketball. I said, well, that's not what they call it in Spain. They said, what do you call it in Spain? I said, baloncesto. And anyway, I was in this culture. I just didn't know anything about it. I'd never been outside a 100-mile radius from my home. I'd never been on an airplane before. It tells you how limited my experience was, even though I grew up in this great business with my dad. So just short story is that I spent 2 years trying to learn Spanish. The first few months, I struggled really greatly because I hadn't had any language background. Number two, I got to the point after 6 months that I was kind of able to do dialogue and conversational. I decided that day when I went to a new city that I would not continue this way. I had to get to the point where I wasn't embarrassed to speak, where I could feel liberal in my ability to conversate and be with people. So I made a decision after 6 months to stop speaking English. It was a difficult decision for a 20-year-old.
Wow.
And for the next 18 months, I never spoke English unless someone didn't speak Spanish and only spoke English, like an American that I met. And I lived with a Spanish family. That made a huge difference. Every waking hour from that point forward in 18 months, I only spoke Spanish. At the end of the mission, I was ready to go back to college, go back to dating. I was excited. My parents came out to see the places I've been working in. And during that process, my dad decided not to drive. He didn't want to deal with the crazy European drivers. They're really good drivers. They just know how to do it in a chaotic or a managed chaotic basis.
Yeah, sure.
So my dad we're in line to get on this bus, and I was talking to the Spaniard in front of me. At the end, my dad grabbed me by the shoulder. My dad didn't speak any Spanish. He said, "What did you guys talk about? Did he ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, he wanted to know where I was from in Spain." My dad, sorry, I did not expect this. My dad grabbed me by the shoulder and he said, "Gary, he thinks you're Spanish." And it was what really inspired me to write the book I'm getting ready to publish about mastery, about leadership mastery, and how do you take something and become a master at it. Some people think you have to spend 10,000 hours at it. In 2 years, I spent 10,000 hours learning Spanish, so in a very concentrated way. But I had mastered the language. I was very fluent, and I even had an accent. I was dreaming in Spanish. I was translating from Spanish to English when I talked to people. It was a remarkable experience. That gave me the basis, along with the sales that I did after that, to really have no fear, to be able to get into a situation and feel like I could handle just anything. Yeah. And so that was that. Hopefully, that's a good answer to what your question was, but that was helpful to me.
It does. And I mean, it shows you the power of being comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? And putting in the work and I guess the comfort into something fully, immersing yourself into something that may be uncomfortable, but on the other side of that is success, or at least leads you to your goal. And so I think that's really impressive. So I would love to learn a little bit more about your book. So it's called The Power of Strategic Influence. When
Sure.
did you write it? When did it come out? And what was the goal of the book?
So I have to go back to my roots. When I got into sales after getting my MBA, etc., I went to work for this commercial publishing company, and I was going to school at the same time. And I took a class from a guy named Stephen R. Covey. So 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the most successful books ever written in business. Stephen was a professor to begin with. He became an advisor to my company. Then he became a leadership trainer for our company. And so I got to know him really well over those 10 years. To the end where I call him Stephen, his wife Sandra, where I had mentoring from him. And so his concepts for the next 30 years after I left that was what I taught my salespeople, was what I taught professional service people that I managed, customer service people. But the great thing about it is because I had that basis and that foundation with Stephen, I started to extrapolate, started to extend the principles, turn them into practical applications, because his is it's just philosophy, what he teaches. How do I take that and turn it into something that creates results? And so that influenced me over a 30-year period as I taught it to come up with principles, with procedures, with approaches that would help people actually learn what influence was, access it, which is hard to do unless you have a reputation. And people always risk their name when they give you access to their influence. Then learn how to acquire it, then learn how to expand it, and then learn how to strategically do something good with it at the end of your career that helps you give back. That's my book. And so what the reason been wanting to write this for 15 years, never had the time. I'm so busy as a VP of sales and then getting into all the startups that I was involved in. And so COVID happened. So I didn't like COVID, but this book is a product of COVID.
Yeah.
I just sold my networking business. I was a co-founder of a company called Trustegrity, and we developed a national business, and I've sold it since then. And I thought I had 6 months before I started my next deal because I wanted to do events stuff, and COVID was not allowing us to do that. So my daughter, my granddaughter, and my wife were writing, and they invited me because I had downtime for the first time in my life, as an adult especially, to join them. And so I did, and I had no idea exactly what I was going to write. I knew it had to be about influence. I got into it. I wrote the first chapter, didn't like it. I shut it down. I decided to do a survey to as many leaders as I could find in the U.S., hundreds of them. Since then, I've done over to 1,000 globally, asking them what is influence, what are the leadership capacity, principles that you think are more important, what are the competencies you think a leader should have. And I did a survey, and then went back and started writing my book again. And I had validation, I had confirmation that the principles I was teaching still were valid. And I started writing, and I got a researcher involved with me. And it started going like clockwork. Like every week we had a chapter, we were pumping out. And so in 3 months, we wrote the book, diagrams, got the book, cover, all that stuff designed. And it took another 2 months to get it published. And I was really surprised, first of all, that it happened so quickly. Number two, that I actually did it. And now I have all these other books I'm going to write, and I just finished one. So it's a great process. If you've never done it before, start it. The most important thing is the outline. It changes, but it's important to have direction. I call it a roadmap. And so one night I stayed up all night creating this roadmap so I'd know exactly the teaching points I wanted to have in each of the chapters in this outline that I had. And so when I got this researcher involved, he knew how to go out and find the right stories combined with my stories. And it was kind of a magical process. And I've had a lot of people tell me that it's one of the best books they've written that has a very step-by-step process for learning how to develop reputation, influence, and leadership. And so that's kind of how it worked.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's a best-selling book, correct?
It's the number one best-selling book. That didn't last forever. It lasted for a few weeks, and then it's come back weirdly, I don't know, every couple of months it becomes bestseller again for a few days. It's a big deal out there to get a bestseller, and you can hire people to do that for you, and they can do it for a day because all the concentrated effort. It's not easy to do it and keep doing it. And my book's good enough that once I have an event or I have a podcast like this or something where people will learn about it, it can become bestseller really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of valuable information in there, I know. And tell me a little bit more about influence, because I think sometimes entrepreneurs or just people in general, they hear a word like influence and they associate it with a negative sometimes, and I think because it can come across as like falsely selling someone. And you talk about using influence ethically. So tell me why influence is so important, and in particular, not just in the corporate world, but for business owners to be able to influence others.
Well, I'm going to respond to the first thing you said about ethics. I mean, there's a lot of influence peddling. That's what they call it out there. And social media, in a legitimate way, is when you find someone who has interest in your product and you hire them to do an advertisement, a promotion, an endorsement, something that's legit. There's other things that aren't legit, that aren't ethical. So that's the stuff I care about. My book is not about social media or social media influence. I changed the name when I decided to publish it to strategic influence. And let me just explain it. So I told you I was the co-founder of a company called Trustegrity. It's a business professional networking organization where we put groups together. There's famous companies out there that have done them really well, but not to the kind of extent that we did. We weren't just trying to become a referral group. We wanted to become a strategic leadership group where we're helping each other through discussions and learning from each other, and we referred each other. I mean, that's just natural when you develop a relationship. Strategic influence is about relationships. It's about getting the right people together so they can actually do something that's meaningful and maybe magical. So here's how I do this, and maybe you do it differently. But when I first started out on LinkedIn, I was one of the first 600,000 people to join LinkedIn, and I have a certificate from Reid Hoffman saying that. Wow. I only wanted to connect with people I knew and had physically met. That was my thinking at the beginning, and that was not the best thinking, but it was smart in a sense that I could do more because I actually knew all these people. The more important part is, though, that you, in my estimation, should be looking to connect with people every single day, and most of the time, not people you don't know, but you should have a profile. So I decided to get out of the first mindset and say, I'm going to create a profile. Here are the different aspects of the type of people I want to have in my sphere of influence. I don't call it circle, I call it sphere. And so every day I spend 10 or 15 minutes and I try to connect, with 5 or 10 new people, and hoping that something may bubble to the top where I will connect on a more legitimate and higher level basis with some of them. And so that's what my book's about. If you look at the back of my book, not only did I write a book, but I also interviewed 12 people. So I would have an interview for each of the chapters. And these are globally known people. I didn't know all these people. I only knew a few, and they all referred me, introduced me on a warm basis to people they knew that they thought would be great for the book. So Brian Esposito, for example, I interviewed him. I've known him for 20 years. We got through the interview, and he says, "This was fabulous. Do you want other people?" I was hoping he would say that. And so he introduced me to Larry Namer, who started E-Television. He introduced me to Crystal Beaumont, who's the CEO of a public company called Talent. And so it just went on like that. And that's the interpretation of what I'm trying to teach in my book, is how you learn how to develop trust between you and someone who would be willing to introduce you to other people that would be good for your sphere. And the more you do that, the more it expands, the more you get the opportunity to become influential yourself in a good way, not a peddling way, in a way that's legit, that's ethical, where you're actually doing good for the world or for the people you're involved with.
Yeah, and I think it's so valuable to be able to know how to get those types of introductions, how to softly get into a relationship. And I think now too many times people are just trying to go right for your information, and so there's got to be an exchange of valuable information back and forth. And I feel that there's a lot of people now that just immediately jump into, hey, can I pick your brain for an hour? Well, why would someone who you may not even know just immediately give up all of their time to give you all the information? So I think reading a book like yours could give people some great insights on how to approach those situations and not just expect everything on your side to happen first before you give anything.
Mike, I just have to say one thing, and that is I have a 5-step process. You expect that in a book, but I do. I have a 5-step process that teaches you how to engage with highly influential people I call centers of influence. I mean, people that are the center of their industry, the Elon Musks of the world, whatever. I mean, he's high up there. But I mean, you can do this with people that are local, regional, national, if you have a methodology. My methodology tells you that the first contact has to be perfect, meaning that you have to have a reason for being there, and you also have to have a reason for them to want to re-engage with you. So if you get together with someone and start asking for help, first of all, that experience will be short-lived. You won't last long in that discussion. Second of all, they'll never want to discuss another thing with you ever again. Maybe not even admit they knew you. So if you can go in with a plan in the right circumstance, and also best way is to be introduced by someone they trust and you trust. Larry Namer, I got an email with Brian Esposito and I on this 3-way email telling him about the great experience he had about being interviewed by me. And Larry accepted on the email, not knowing me from Adam. Same thing with
Wow.
Gary Kennedy introduced me to other people. He was the first president of Oracle. I've known him for a long time. Same thing with Crystal Beaumont. Same thing with other people that I was being introduced to. Because of the trust level they felt with the individual was introducing me, it's like there was no question. There's one person, I was introduced to Nando Cesaron. He's the president of UPS US. Very important guy. I was introduced. He was a little more hesitant to just say yes, but he was willing to say, send me your book. Took him 6 months to read it. I found out he even took it to the beach one time. That was pretty cool. And then I found out that he liked it so much that he wanted to share it with his management team, which I said, of course. And then he said, let's have a discussion. We had a discussion about it. He loved the book. I said, would you be willing to have an interview? He said, yes. The other interviews happened really quickly. His took 6 months. And then we did it in person. We recorded it. And now he's going to be speaking at a conference that I'm arranging right now with the University of South Carolina in April of next year.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, the amount of people that you've gotten introductions to without having ever previously known them is impressive. Some of those names that I'm hearing are people that I look up to for information and read their books. So that's really incredible. I could probably have a 2-hour podcast with you, or if not more, because you have an incredible wealth of knowledge. But
I'm talking too much, Mike. Sorry.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, honestly, talk as much as you want because you're giving the listeners a lot of great information.
Yeah.
If you could leave the people listening to this show with one piece of advice, what do you think you might tell them?
I usually give the same kind of a thing. People ask me that question, but I'm going to say something different today, and that is you have to listen to your gut. You can call the gut whatever you want. But there's something inside you that tells you you're better than you're performing at, that you have the capacity to give more than you're giving, and that you can, achieve some level of legacy in your life if you really focus on it. Legacy means that you've achieved a level that very few people achieve, and that it's something that also benefits other people, not just yourself, so you can leave a legacy behind you. And that's kind of what my next book is about. I love the fact that there's an opportunity for each of us to identify that one thing that can be special to us, that we can become an expert at, that people will appreciate, and you'll become the go-to person for. You should become competent, I think, in a lot of things, but there should be one thing I think that you can really point to and say, that's me. That's what I'm good at. That's how I contribute in this life. So I think that's really what it's a different one I usually say, but I think because I'm thinking about my new book. So
yeah. And do you have a timeline on when that new book might launch?
It's written. I just got back the last edited interview that I did. This time I only did 4 interviews, 2 women and 2 men, because there's 4 sections, and I didn't want to try to replicate what I did in the first book. That was a big project to have 12 interviews, 12 chapters. This one's a little shorter. It's about 200 something pages. But I'm sorry. What else did you want me to answer? I'm sorry.
Just the timeline of when people might.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Launch, like when they.
Yes, I think it's going to be early spring. So I mean, it's written. I've got 2 publishers I'm trying to make a decision between right now. I'm excited about that. And then I hope it'll go quickly. I think 2 months, as early as 2 months, so it could be out in February or January late, or it could be out in March, depending on which approach I take. Okay. It's going to be called, right now it's called Influential Leadership Mastery. That name could change.
Okay. At the very least, I would highly recommend that everyone go and pick up a copy of The Power of Strategic Influence, because if some of the names of people that you mentioned are reading your book, then certainly all of the listeners on this show can learn a lot from this book as well. And I'm looking forward to picking up my own copy. So Gary, thank you so much for being a part of this show. If people wanted to reach out to you, or if they wanted to follow you, you mentioned you're on LinkedIn. Where else might people be able to find you?
So LinkedIn's great, but you can also go to my personal website, GaryCLaney.com. So GaryCLaney.com. You can go to my book. It's called The Power of Strategic Influence.com. So those are the 3 places. I think LinkedIn, you'd probably be able to look at my background. We could connect if you're on LinkedIn. I mean, I'm on Facebook too, but I don't use it for business really. So yeah, I'd love to engage with some of your followers.
Yeah, appreciate it. Well, thank you so much. I learned a lot today. There is a lot to unpack in what you said today. So I appreciate it very much. Influence is clearly a very important tool, and you've been very successful at that. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. It's my dad's sign off.
All right. Take care, Gary.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.